Someone pulled out a line of credit under my name for, it was around 19.5 thousand.
Steve Jones says his nightmare began at the beginning of the year when a letter from CIBC showed up at his home indicating his credit privileges had been blocked. When he contacted CIBC, Steve says he was told the account had been frozen due to fraud. Still, Steve says he was assured his credit score wouldn't be affected. But that wasn't the case.
Imagine opening your mailbox and finding a letter from a bank you've never used, telling you that your credit privileges have been blocked on an account you never opened, and that someone has taken out nearly $20,000 in your name without your knowledge and without your permission. And now, your financial future is suddenly at risk through no fault of your own.
He was told the account had been frozen due to suspected fraud.
This is the nightmare that became reality for Steve Jones. And what happened to him over the following months reveals just how vulnerable any one of us can be to identity fraud and how frustrating the process of fixing it can become even when the bank itself acknowledges the crime. If stories like this matter to you, and you want to learn how to protect yourself and the people you care about, make sure to subscribe to this channel right now because we break down real fraud cases every single week, so you can stay informed and stay safe. Steve himself described the moment he first realized what had happened, saying, quote, "Someone pulled out a line of credit under my name for around $19.5 thousand," end quote. And in those words,
said that, yes, we are aware it's highly fraudulent and we have froze the account, and an investigator will be calling you in 5 to 10 business days.
You can hear the disbelief, the confusion, and the beginning of a months-long ordeal that would test his patience and shake his trust in the systems designed to protect him. What makes this case so disturbing is not just the fraud itself, but the fact that Steve did everything right. He was financially responsible, he monitored his credit, he kept his banking simple, and yet someone somewhere was still able to weaponize his identity against him. And that is the harsh truth at the heart of so many of these cases, because scammers are not just targeting the careless or the uninformed. They are targeting anyone whose personal information they can access. And sometimes the betrayal comes not from a stranger in a distant country, but from gaps.
Someone pulled out a line of credit under my name for, it was around 19.5 thousand.
And failures in the very institutions we trust to keep us safe. Let us walk through exactly how this unfolded, because the timeline matters and the details reveal just how broken the response to this fraud became. Steve Jones lives in a suburban neighborhood and works full-time, and he keeps his finances straightforward, with one primary bank, online statements, and automatic bill payments, and he checks his credit score a few times a year.
Very stressed about this because due to this, it's hitting my credit rating pretty bad, or my credit score, and I need to remortgage here in September.
Especially before major financial decisions. And in this case, he had a very important decision coming up because he was preparing to refinance his mortgage in September, and his credit rating, which reflected decades of steady, responsible payments, was going to be essential to securing good rates. Then, in January of that year, a letter arrived from CIBC, a major Canadian bank, and it stated that his credit privileges had been blocked and referenced a personal line of credit, and warned that withdrawals were no longer permitted. And here is the thing that made Steve's stomach drop. He had never been a CIBC customer, not ever in his entire life. The letter looked completely legitimate, with standard formatting and a corporate logo and procedural language, and it did not ask for money or threaten immediate legal action. It simply informed him that access to an account he never opened had been restricted. Steve did the responsible thing and called the number listed for CIBC, and on that first call, he says he was told that yes, the account had been frozen due to suspected fraud, and that an investigator would be calling him within 5 to 10 business days. And he was assured that his credit score would not be affected. And so he wrote down the timeline on a notepad near his desk, and he waited. But no call ever came. Then, in February, another letter arrived, and this one was labeled a final past due notice, and it stated that nearly $20,000 had to be paid in full, or his credit rating could suffer. And the tone was firmer, and the balance was listed precisely at approximately $19,500, and payment instructions were included. Steve called CIBC again, and this time he says he was told there was no record of his earlier contact in January. No notation that he had reported fraud. No documentation of the conversation he clearly remembered having. He described the previous call. He repeated the account number. From the letter, he confirmed his identity again. And the representative took down his information and told him to call every few days to track progress. And he was advised that correcting his credit file could take 8 to 12 weeks. From that point forward, Steve began calling regularly, and each call required him to explain the entire situation from the beginning, and he kept a record of dates and approximate times, and he waited on hold and checked caller ID before answering any return calls, and when asked what he thought of having to do all this legwork himself, he said simply, quote, "It was terrible." End quote. Meanwhile, his credit score was changing, and not in a good way, and he monitored it through online tools and watched as the number dropped from what he describes as good to fair. And this was not an abstract problem because he needed to refinance his mortgage in September, and lenders rely on credit bureau data. And he could see the negative entry tied directly to the fraudulent CIBC line of credit, dragging his score down. He asked whether the fraudulent account could be removed immediately while the investigation continued. But he says he does not recall receiving a direct answer. CIBC later stated in writing that whenever it becomes aware of an issue or one is reported, it investigates fully and takes action, including amending credit bureau records as soon as possible. And the bank also said it has sophisticated layers of security and monitoring that work effectively to prevent identity fraud. But as one cybersecurity expert noted in response, quote, "Sophisticated does not mean effective, and it does not mean that they work." End quote. Steve does not know how the line of credit was opened in his name, and he had not applied, and he had not visited a branch, and he had not received any verification texts or emails related to CIBC, and he does not recall any unusual calls requesting personal information, and his mail had not gone missing to his knowledge, and the bank declined to comment on the specific details of his case, citing privacy and security constraints. The process unfolded in fragments that revealed just how many points of failure there were. Because first, a fraudulent account was opened, then it was flagged internally as suspicious, then it was frozen. But despite that freeze, past due, notices were still generated and mailed, and at some point the account information was reported to credit bureaus, and at some point his January fraud report was either not recorded or not accessible when he called in February, and it remains unclear at what stage the safeguards actually failed, whether during account opening or during fraud detection, or during internal documentation, or during credit reporting. Weeks passed, and the past due status remained visible on his credit file, and the balance remained listed, and the refinancing date approached, and Steve describes feeling stressed. saying, quote, "I had no idea this would happen to me," end quote. The drop in his score was measurable and the timeline was fixed, and he began paying monthly for an Equifax credit monitoring subscription because he wanted immediate alerts for any new changes. And though the cost was modest compared to the $20,000 line of credit, it was an additional expense he had not planned. And he later asked whether CIBC would cover that cost. And he says he never received a response. Steve continues to check his credit score regularly, and he keeps the monitoring subscription active, and he reviews his mail carefully, and he answers unfamiliar calls with caution, and he writes down reference numbers, and he keeps copies of every letter. The mortgage renewal date is approaching, and the correction was made within days of media involvement. But the months before that were marked by repeated calls and shifting timelines and broken promises. The nearly $20,000 balance no longer appears on his file, and the account was confirmed as fraudulent. But the explanation for how it began has not been provided. For Steve, the loss was not direct. Cash stolen from his bank account. It was time and uncertainty, and a temporary erosion of a credit record built over decades. And the letters are stored in a folder at home, and the notepad with January dates remains on his desk, and he says he still does not know how his name was used to secure a loan from a bank where he had never held an account. If this story opened your eyes and you want to see more real cases like this, make sure to subscribe and hit that notification bell so you never miss a video. Because knowledge is the best defense against fraud. The lesson here is clear, and it is one we should all take seriously, because identity theft can happen to anyone, even the most careful and financially responsible among us, and the systems designed to protect us do not always work the way they should. And sometimes you have to fight for months, just to undo damage you never caused. Check your credit regularly, protect your personal information, and never assume it cannot happen to you. Because as Steve Jones learned the hard way, it absolutely can. Stay safe, stay informed, and we will see you in the next one.